Shayna Goldman, our insider from The Athletic, has joined us. She's been, I would say, on a pretty good streak since last summer at breaking deals and then breaking down the deals. Shayna, how would you describe your day so far as we approach the deadline?
Quiet, very quiet, because we've had a week of chaos. And I know some are complaining oh, today's going to be a dud. And I still think there's going to be more to happen, but I'm kind of liking this extended trade deadline. I like that we have a chance to actually talk about each deal before diving into the next one. And I hope this is a trend.
And of course, you can follow Shayna's work on Twitter and quick evaluations of deals. The latest is Namestnikov from San Jose. Sorry, I had to think for a second which franchise he was back with. But
Sharks legend.
San Jose, yes, to Winnipeg, correct? And just a quick thought on that. I would say that I was surprised when they made the deal in the first place for Eyssimont, because I thought he'd been pretty noticeable.
Yeah.
I dare I say productive in his brief time in San Jose. So anyway, obviously the Sharks saw some value in making another deal here with Winnipeg.
Yeah, and there's value in, leveraging cap space, which is exactly what they did. Tampa couldn't afford Vlad Namestnikov for the second time, so they had to move him at the deadline for the second time. And San Jose, I think, knew exactly what they were doing. They were never going to keep him. They were going to flip him to a contender. And he's a good player for that, because while he's not good, he's not great offensively. He doesn't drive play. He doesn't do anything spectacular. He does the little things to make plays happen. He's really good in his own zone. And he's just I think the perfect way to describe him, and maybe it's tired at this point because I know I've said it before, but he's a good facilitator of his line mates. So he's someone that you can put on with top players who's not going to weigh them down. He's going to help them do the little things, and he's good defensively. So a little versatility, a little bit of bite. Why not?
And Winnipeg probably just needs a tiny little bit of a wake up here. I mean, the reality is they're sitting in wild card 2 today, and that puts optics can be real, even though the point totals haven't changed a ton within the Central, all of a sudden when you see yourself in that spot, knowing there's no more room to fall, I don't think I'm surprised by the Jets making a little tweak here. Obviously in the East, there's so many elite teams that we've been talking about. The Devils, for everything that they've accomplished so far, added a little bit more today, but he's not a rental in Curtis Lazar.
Yeah, I did not realize he had term on his deal. He's one of the players that it's always surprising to see a player get term like that. But then again, when you can get it super cheap, depth players are super interesting because they're the players that teams often overpay. So it does make sense when you have a player who you think is going to be good defensively, a good penalty killer, which generally speaking he is. It just didn't fit in Vancouver. If you can keep that at a fixed price that it does work out. It's not like they paid $2 million a year to keep around a fourth liner, which is always bad business. So it didn't work out in Vancouver. Vancouver is over the cap for next season as it is. They are a mess, to put it nicely. So moving him out and getting a pick back is a good bit of business. And the Devils get a little bit of help on their fourth line if they so choose to use it consistently. And that's going to be the big question. But that fourth line's been overperforming expectations for some time. We've started to see them kind of trend in the wrong direction. And some of it's because of their defense. So Lazar doesn't bring much to the table offensively, but he does defensively. And in theory is a good penalty killer, which New Jersey doesn't need, but it doesn't hurt to have. So it makes sense from their perspective because, every team wants to shore up their depth a little bit. Plus, here's someone who can actually bring some fun to the postseason. We know the good vibes he can bring and, the clutch plays and big moments, and you can't rely on that. But for $1 million, why not?
Right. Now, the place he's coming from that you just talked about with Vancouver, I'm sorry, how many weeks is JT Miller out of the lineup again?
Oh, no, he played last night. He's healthy. It's miraculous.
How could I forget?
It's really something that he was so injured that he couldn't play for weeks. It's just everything about that situation is so messy. I don't envy the Canucks situation. I think I've said it before. When you look at rebuilding teams and you look at retooling teams, you can find a positive in literally anything. In Vancouver, not so much. And this whole situation just adds another element to it.
Did you think there was a suitor or is there still a suitor for JT Miller? Or is this now going to be the long-term marriage consummated between these two once all clauses disappear in the summer?
There was a suitor, but I think the thing that's so important to remember is for every trade that happens, there's a million that don't. And it's for a ton of reasons. It can be dollars and cents don't work out. There's a small disagreement about the return. Whatever it may be, things break apart and things heat back up again. So it's a situation we're all going to have to wait and see how it unfolds. if I'm Vancouver, moving that contract before it starts is the best case scenario for them, because it was a bad contract at the time of the signing, but they still went forward with it. Anyone willing to take that on is taking a big risk, but like there are ways to maximize Miller's game. He's not great at 5-on-5. You know, he's not worth what he's being paid at 5-on-5, but it does bring some scoring pop, and he's very good on the power play. There's just that lack of versatility in his game. He really doesn't play center, and everybody seems to recognize it after the fact instead of exploring it before committing to him. So that's, you know, the downfall of it all, but we'll see what shakes out with that, because I think for Vancouver right now, they have to do something. They have to do something to save a little bit of face right now. And that's figuring out their direction. If they don't make any big moves, I think their direction, it kind of shows a lack of clarity on their end as well.
You think they'll find a home for Connor Garland?
I think that they have to move at least one forward with term. I'm not sure which one. And I think it depends on which they can get the best deal for. But it's so interesting to see what they want back. They want help down the middle. But if they never if they never signed JT Miller to that deal, they could have still had Bo Horvat. So it's like fixing past mistakes.
Right.
And if you're going to commit to Miller, you have to ensure that he does actually play center. I think that that's a priority. It seems like they want help on defense. The Filip Hronek deal felt like came out of nowhere, though. So they did get their right-handed defenseman in that. But like, is there more to come? Can they find those young NHL players who are actually capable? Like it seems like that's what they're looking for, to avoid that 18 and 19-year-old only, and then you elongate the process and don't make the most out of like Elias Pettersson's time. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they can actually make a deal happen, because everyone knows who they have available. And I think everyone can see the desperation to make something happen, and they just try to use that to their own advantage. And why wouldn't you?
Sabres have been without Rasmus Dalene this past week, 3 games. He is on the ice at practice right now, so optimism can hopefully run high for an imminent return, even if it's not tomorrow against Tampa. The schedule ramps up real quick with games Monday, Tuesday as well. We saw Riley Stillman make his Sabre debut last night with all the different names that are seemingly still floating around, including a couple out of Seattle and Soucy and Borgen, but more veteran players like Klingberg and Kulikov, among others. Do you sense that Buffalo might, and or other teams might be actively involved in pursuing those, I guess what you call depth defensemen?
Yeah, I see someone like Kulikov definitely getting picked up. He's the kind of player that I feel like general managers love come playoff time. They love that hard-nosed defenseman who's physical. And I just fear he's a little too one-dimensional at this point. But I do think that in the right role, which obviously he doesn't have in Anaheim, that's the case with the rebuilding team all the time. Players are slotted out of position. It's just too overwhelming of a workload. So if you manage him correctly, it can be fine. It just has to be for the right price. John Klingberg is like the complete opposite of that situation. Like, a lot of times we talk about a player who's going to go to a contender and they're going to play with all the support in the world, and we're going to see how it elevates their game. He bet on himself to go to Anaheim to be the guy there and see how it all would shake out, and then prove that if he goes to a contender, he'd be very good. Mm-hmm. And it didn't work. It just didn't work. I don't think it's in him to be that guy on a team that weak. And I think it just absolutely killed his trade stock. But I think teams like, you know, the Tampa Bays of the world and the Carolina Hurricanes of the world, who are really smart and figuring out player value, true value, and you know, figuring out everything about their environments and how much that does or doesn't impact them. I think those are the teams that are going to be more interested in him. And Soucy is someone I think a lot of teams should be looking at. Absolutely. But I won't be surprised if Seattle doesn't make too much noise to break up what they have, since it does feel like they're playing the long game.
Yeah, and I think that's why it surprised me that Soucy and Borgen's name would even come up in all of this. Obviously, our friend, your great friend, Allison Lucan, is out in Seattle and would have a really good pulse on this too. It's puzzling because these are not super expensive players. Even if Borgen gets a deserved raise, you know, as an RFA this offseason, it's not going to be some monumental leap. It's not going to put Seattle in a tough spot. So you're surprised that the names would even be floating?
Yes, from that perspective, but no, from the idea of they've been really good kind of figuring out their long game in the last, you know, we're talking a very small sample, but they've been very good at picking out players that they see a future with and who they don't, and knowing when to get the assets on them. Like that's a big thing. I think a reason they have so many assets to play with, and we were saying it, they could be the disruptor of the deadline. They have the power to do it. Look at the picks they've got, you know, all of that is because they knew who to move on from last year. They knew who they did and didn't want in this picture. So if they keep on the path that they've been on, and it does seem like they're going to stay a little more status quo, they're already, you know, missed out on the biggest names on the market. they can look at that the same way and go, well, we know this player is not a part of our future. No, we're not taking ourselves out of playoff contention. No, we're not trying to mix anything up too much here, but we're just trying to move forward with our plan, get the assets back while you can, and see what you can do with them this summer.
Any goaltenders going to move today?
I would hope so. I think it would be fun. We already got the biggest one already in Jonathan Quick. And I think
I'm so with you on that, by the way. Like, I just think it's amazing what could happen here moving forward. That's something that is, as you said yesterday on Twitter, so spicy.
I want a battle of spite. I want that playoff. And the thing is, I couldn't even guarantee that Quick would be the starter, and that his play this year has been bad. It's been bad for years, and everyone seems to forget that because of the name value and because last year he had hot streaks, but he also lost his starter's net for a good chunk of the season, and then he only got it back right before the playoffs. So I feel like that was the outlier in the last 5 years, not the other way around. But I'm really curious, like, how much does he play? Can he bounce back? Can the spite motivate him? And I think we're all rooting for the answer to be yes. But I think teams are so careful to acquire goaltenders midseason because, especially a backup goalie, they don't get the time. Now I'm pretending to be the goalie expert since Marty's not here, but they don't get the time to practice and get in game action. If you're a backup, how many games are you truly going to be in the lineup between deadline and the end of season? So by the time you're finally getting up to gear, the season might be done. So I think it's so much tougher, but I do want to see, could Karel Vejmelka go? I don't know what Arizona's, ideas are moving forward besides cut salary left, right, and sideways. I don't think Arizona knows what to do. So I want to see what he can do in a different environment. I'm still curious about someone like James Reimer. Like, there's definitely goalies out there to be had, but will anyone bite? Like, that's the big question.
Certainly is, as time is ticking towards the 3 p.m. deadline. Last one, James Van Riemsdyk. Obviously, Winnipeg not in pursuit anymore after the Namestnikov acquisition. Does Van Riemsdyk find a different address today?
I think so. This one's going to take, I would bet, a third-party broker because he does have a high cap hit, but he's a player worth adding. Yes, he's on a bad team. Yes, his numbers have, cratered from what they used to be. He's not at the heights of his career, but I think below the surface, we could still see some positives in his offensive generation. And we know he still has that finishing talent. He's a really good net front presence. He's someone that could easily go on power play 1 for a team that needs it. Like, I don't know, Seattle, that's been outperforming expectations all year on the advantage, and that's just not going to hold up. Or on a power play 2 on a deeper team. That's a good player to have. And even if he's your middle 6 talent at that point, it's really not bad. So I say he's definitely on the move. It doesn't help the Flyers to keep him around, and I think it helps a contender to have him.
10 seconds or less. Any name we haven't mentioned you want to throw out there before you say goodbye?
I still want to see where Dante Fabro's going. He's young. I still think San Jose, San Jose makes sense with the David Quinn connection, but I want to see where he goes. Nashville's selling, and they're selling big.
All right. Sounds great. We will follow you all day and look forward to our visit again next week. Thanks so much for everything, Shayna.
Thanks for having me.